Welcome back to History Book, where the past is darker than you remember. Tonight we step into a world built on blood, betrayal, and broken crowns. The story you're about to hear isn't in your textbooks because they were too afraid to print it. And hey, if you want to see your name at the end of my next video, just comment below what story you'd love me to whisper next. You might just drift off to the one you asked for. Here you are, staring at the river Tiber, when suddenly a scream slices through the morning mist. What's that sound? A wolf? A human? Nope. It's the sound of a legend being born or maybe dying. But every mile of road was paved with blood. Every temple was bought with tribute and oppression. Every arch was built to commemorate the crushing of a rebellion. I'm about to share the real story of Rome, and trust me, it's not for kids. They were suspicious of Rome's ambitions, and for good reason. So Romulus did something desperate. He organized the rape of the Sabine women. He needed more men to fight his wars, more women to bear his children. Some folks say the she-wolf was a goddess, but really she symbolizes the wild heart of Italy. The boys, they were raised fierce and free, far from helpless. This is the true founding of Rome. Not a glorious tale, but a bloody, brutal affair. The sins of the father were visited upon the children, and the crimes of the founders would echo through eternity. It was Rome's first great revolution. It was brutal, depraved, and criminal. Yet it is foundational to Rome. It would raise great emperors to godlike status, only to crucify them when they fell from power. And believe it or not, it gets even crazier. For when Rome was just a tiny settlement of a few hundred people, Romulus needed more people. Go ahead, click on that thumbnail and I'll see you there. Or don't. Instead, watch this video again and again, forever. Friends, Rome was not born from glory, but from violence, theft, and blood. Every generation would fight their own civil wars. Every king would have to watch their dynasty die to secure their own legacy. When Romulus killed Remus and stole the Alban kingship, he committed the very same crimes that would bring down every emperor after him. Every Roman monarch would suffer from the sins of their predecessors, because the next episode is just a few clicks away. The she-wolf? Definitely not just a cute fable. Things got messy. Messy. Romulus wanted to expand their territory by capturing the Acropolis of Segesta. Remus was against it. People from all over the known world flocked to Rome, each bringing their own traditions and tales. Let's rewind to when Rome was just a field and 7 hills, long before kings, the Republic, or Caesar himself. Italy was under Etruscan rule, but the Latins owned the area where Rome would rise. Meet Numitor, king of Alba Longa. Sure, they kicked out the Etruscan kings, but their love for battle stayed strong. Rome conquered vast lands, building roads, aqueducts, temples, and arches along the way. He had 2 brothers, Amulius and Umber, who were twins, making him the uncle of young Romulus. But the story takes a dark turn when Amulius topples Numitor, forcing him into exile and leaving Romulus and Remus to survive in the wild. Local heroes became part of the Roman saga. Think Romulus and Remus. Thinking their city was too small and weak to risk war, Romulus didn't care. He kicked Remus out. That's when Remus, angry, taunted Romulus about having more men if he opened the gates. Romulus took it personally, and in a heated moment threw a spear at Remus, killing him. Trapped in this endless loop, forever remembering Rome was not born from glory, but from violence, theft, and blood, packed with propaganda. Did the Romans really kick off their city by offing an Etruscan king and snatching his throne? Who knows, but it's a wild thought. They established Rome in 753 BCE along the Tiber River. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. They avenged their dad, reclaimed the throne, and built their city. And every monarch would eventually meet their end in bloodshed and betrayal. Romulus and Remus declared they wanted to build their own city. And just like that, Rome was born from murder and betrayal. So they killed the she-wolf not out of cruelty, but as a sign of respect. Some stories say they lived as shepherds, but others say they lived as brigands, outlaws in the wildwood. They gave her a proper burial, and then set off to find their uncle Numitor, the rightful king of Alba Longa. But the neighboring cities would not help him. Legend says that Romulus killed a serpent that threatened the she-wolf, and another time he single-handedly defeated an entire pack of hungry wolves. This was not some romantic fling between star-crossed lovers. No, this was a dark and violent event, a mass abduction of women by a warlord looking to expand his population. Every year they celebrated the raptus, the rape of the Sabine women, and the very dynasty founded that day would end in bloodshed. The Tarquinid dynasty would reign for 4 generations until the last king, Tarquinius Superbus, was driven out of Rome in 509 BCE by a group of rebels led by Lucius Junius Brutus. The Tarquinia were Etruscan, and their removal marked the end of foreign rule in Rome. Rome would go on to become a republic ruled by the wealthy elite. It would conquer Italy and then the Mediterranean. It would fight civil wars that lasted for years, destroying itself in the process. And it would turn on the very people it claimed to be liberating, exploiting them, pillaging them, and murdering them, calling it civilization. Romulus took the daughters of the Sabine kings and raped them until they conceived. This would be the start of Rome's ruling class. And that, my friends, is why Rome was never a city you could trust. That last one does sound suspiciously like propaganda. You know what else? The fact that they allegedly killed the she-wolf after raising her sons to manhood, cooked her, and ate her. You see, Romulus and Remus were raised as human. The she-wolf was simply a motherly figure, a mother who loved her kids so much she'd even sacrifice herself for them, right? Once Romulus and Remus grew up, they had to carve their own path. But let's be real, it's a story filled with murder, abandonment, and even cannibalism. With Numitor's help, but then the she-wolf? She's a symbol of the wild spirit that Rome sprang from. And yeah, those early stories. Rome wasn't just Italy's crown jewel. It became a melting pot. Even the glorious Rome has its share of blood on its hands, starting right from its founding. Back then, now, the boys grew up with a she-wolf who raised them and taught them how to survive. When they found their uncle, this isn't a pretty tale, folks. From the start, the Romans craved violence and conquest, and that hunger never really faded. He has no clue what's about to happen. As he strolls to the Forum, the heart of Roman life, he'll pass a line of condemned men with their hands tied. One by one, they're hoisted up on wooden frames, spread eagle, and crucified for all to see. Dressed in a white toga with a purple stripe, marking him as a patrician, he walks down a narrow street, flanked by high walls. The crowd shouts, throwing rocks at the chained men, their anger palpable in the air. After Tarquinius was kicked out of Rome, he headed over to the nearby town of Veii. The streets there were buzzing with the sounds of drums and cymbals, and you could feel the tension in the air as people muttered to each other, sharing uneasy glances. But as time went on, it became clear that not everything was sunshine and rainbows in this new republic. Out of nowhere, a group of armed men sprang from around a corner and stabbed him to death. They didn't stop there. They chopped up his body and tossed the pieces into the Tiber River. Frustration was brewing among the people, especially towards the rich and powerful. Those in power could propose laws and even block the ones that didn't sit well with the masses. Meanwhile, in the Senate, influential leaders were busy plotting, whispering rumors, and even poisoning their rivals. The whole idea of the Republic was supposed to be about freedom and giving the people a voice, right? But those voices often got drowned out by bribery, murder, and false accusations echoing through the Senate halls. To keep up appearances, men were crucified in the streets, thrown off cliffs or sewn up in sacks with snakes, goats, and pigs. Throughout the early Republic, mysterious deaths among the tribunes led many Romans to believe that the patricians were pulling the strings behind these assassinations. They were desperate for someone to blame for their troubles, and the tribunes of the plebs often became their scapegoats. And let's not forget, even the educated elite were superstitious. They consulted oracles, performed rituals, appeased minor deities, sacrificed animals, and they believed that these practices could influence the outcome of battles, the fertility of their crops, the success of their business deals. The Ludiones were quite the characters, using their so-called powers to win over the crowd. They'd warn folks about disasters, spill the tea on plots against their favorite leaders, or dangle promises of great things if people backed certain policies. Since everyone looked up to them, the Ludus often tried to sway elections, nudge politicians, or snag positions of power to do what they thought was best for Rome. But if they pushed their luck too far, the patricians were quick to label them as witches and have them executed. It was a tough game, especially for those who only cared about themselves. You see, early Roman government had its fair share of shady characters filling important roles. These gigs were attractive to the unscrupulous because they came with a lot of power. One time, Marcus witnessed a gathering of tribes get broken up by armed men wielding clubs and whips. He later heard that some of those men ended up drowned in the Tiber, with the patricians taking the blame. Meanwhile, the rich folks, his friends and neighbors, were getting richer by the day. Their houses were growing larger. They were buying up more land and slaves, and dressing in finer clothes. But on the flip side, more people were sinking into poverty. The streets were getting grimier, and hunger was creeping in. Things got even weirder lately, with strange happenings in the Forum that Marcus just couldn't wrap his head around. He turned to his dad, Lucius Junius Brutus, and asked why the soldiers seemed so unhappy. His dad replied, "They're mad because they don't have a king to lead them anymore." That night, as his family huddled in the dark, they heard the shouts and screams outside. They stayed quiet, not a word spoken. When the noise finally faded, his mother and sister started to cry, while his father just sighed and went back to sleep. Marcus wanted to ask questions, but he held back. He felt a knot of fear in his stomach. What was going on in this new republic? Was it really better than living under kings? You know where a king is, where he lives, and if he crosses a line, you can deal with him directly. But these elected officials, They're always lurking in the shadows. As Marcus watched the soldiers blend into the crowd, his father's words echoed in his mind, leaving him uneasy. When he was younger, his dad had taken him to the Forum to witness the historic events. He recalled a gathering of senators, patricians, armed men, and the most respected elders of Rome. That day, Junius Brutus, who was actually related to the legendary Romulus, stepped up and declared that the kingship was over. Rome was now a republic, a word that meant the people's business, or res publica. A new government was on the horizon, one where power would rest in the hands of the people. They would elect leaders every year, and everyone thought this was the way to go. The people of Rome were overjoyed by the news. They celebrated, they drank, and they cheered for this fresh start. But deep down, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. They sang and swore to support this new government. Meanwhile, Tarquin was plotting his revenge with his buddy, Porsenna, the king of Veii. But the Romans caught wind of the scheme and sent two guys, Gaius Mucius and Titus Veturius, to spy on him. Disguised as traveling bards, they slipped into Tarquin's camp. When the coast was clear, Mucius lunged with his dagger and stabbed Tarquin in the neck. But guess what? The king didn't die. He took off in a panic and dropped his golden ring. Mucius grabbed it and tossed it into the Tiber River. Tarquin fled to Tarquinia, trying to rally an army to march on Rome. But he got crushed and spent the rest of his days in exile, eventually dying in Carthage. Back in Rome, the atmosphere was lively, especially in the Subura, the oldest part of the city. Kids were playing, dogs were barking, and vendors were shouting about their goods. Life was bustling, but today was special. It marked the first anniversary of King Tarquinius Superbus's ousting. As Marcus made his way through the packed streets toward the Forum, he could feel the excitement in the air with music and celebration all around, and dancing and wine all around. But he knows that many of these folks actually hated his father. His dad was a big supporter of the king, the so-called monarchists, and they totally lost. He's got a gold ring on his hand, a gift from his father, marking him as a full member of Roman society, an adult guy who can make contracts, own property, and do his civic duties. Plus, he's got a small dagger on his hip. It's for self-defense, but it also carries a heavy meaning. If a Roman gets too old to care for himself or gets captured by enemies, he's expected to take his own life. As he strolls through the Forum, he can't help but wonder, did Rome ever really have freedom? People are going about their daily lives while men are being crucified right before their eyes. Friends and family of the condemned stand nearby, attending to final duties, then just turn away, pretending they've never seen anything disturbing. Now that I've got your attention, let me ask you a question. In today's episode of Facts Matter, we're following a noble Roman citizen, walking the streets of Rome in 509 BCE. It was the year after the last king was overthrown, and let me tell you, it was a day like no other. The Romans were out in full force, celebrating and cheering, but spoiler alert, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Meet our noble Roman Marcus. He's decked out in his finest clothes. As he steps out of his house, he ties his dagger to his robe with a strip of leather. Just yesterday, the former king's brother, Aristodemus, and his sons were kicked out of their homes in the dead of night and dragged to the Forum. As Marcus strolls along, he overhears chatter about the ex-king Tarquinius, and it takes him back to the day they drove him out. But something felt off. While everyone else was celebrating, the veterans of the Roman army looked angry and suspicious. They sensed that Rome was shifting, that power was changing hands. Still, Marcus was all in for the Republic. After all, he was a Roman citizen, and this new system meant more power for him. He once spotted a popular tribune of the plebs, Publius Sulpicius Rufus, in the Forum, but one night he woke up to screams outside his window. Little did he know his dad and the other patricians were working hard to keep the Republic safe, navigating a whole new world that was changing faster than anyone could predict. When you think about Hannibal crossing the Alps, you might picture a legendary general leading his troops over a massive mountain range. But what if it wasn't a hero's journey at all? What if it was more like a nightmare? Instead of a disciplined army, imagine a cannibalistic cult creeping in the shadows. The Romans were on edge, fully aware that Hannibal was coming, but they had no clue when. As time dragged on, he finally showed up in Italy. Battles swung back and forth, and honestly, neither side was doing great. Rumors swirled about Carthaginian spies and sorcerers, but what really sent chills down their spines were the lurking horrors from the African hills. The Romans weren't facing monsters that day. They were up against Hannibal's army. And let's be real, Hannibal was a monster in his own right. He moved his forces from city to city, always staying one step ahead, striking when they least expected it. Desperate, the Romans thought they needed to appease the gods. They sought a special virgin, untouched and pure. But when it was all said and done, Hannibal stood grimly among the corpses, with haunting questions that would follow him forever. The Romans were really frustrated. They'd poured so much cash into mercenaries, but it just wasn't working out. They'd heard wild tales about the Carthaginians sacrificing kids, but seeing it firsthand was shocking. As they fled, the screams of the burning virgin filled the air, sparking a fire in their hearts. They fought harder, but Hannibal was ready. Rome was changed forever. They faced their own darkness and would never forget the price of war. The Romans faced tons of challenges, and honestly, they were worn out. They'd lost many good men, and hope was slipping away. But they kept pushing forward, knowing they had to win not just for themselves, but for the future of Rome. They expected anger from the Romans, so they were ready. It was time to find a new way to take down Hannibal, and that's when the priests had a light bulb moment. Hannibal's army was just too strong, and his tactics were on point. The Romans were losing ground, and panic was spreading through the streets of Rome. They knew they had to change their game plan and face their inner fears. Pressure mounted on the leaders to wrap up the war fast, but they had no answers. Everyone was frustrated, feeling powerless. Meanwhile, Hannibal was busy securing his supply lines, knowing the Romans would try to cut him off. He had to be ready for whatever came next. Hannibal's spies were everywhere, and he knew what the Romans were planning before they even did it. Hannibal was dodging their traps and ambush like a pro, keeping his army well fed and armed. Meanwhile, back in Rome, the leaders were gearing up for the next showdown with Carthage. They'd learned the hard way not to underestimate Hannibal, so they decided to shake things up a bit. They hired mercenaries, tough, seasoned fighters who had fought for all sorts of armies. Sure, they were pricey, but the Romans didn't care. They were desperate for a win. These mercenaries were used to working with different cultures and following various generals, so the Romans thought they'd finally have the edge to take down Hannibal. Little did they know, Hannibal had his own secret weapon. He gathered his best troops and sent them off to Africa. He might have won the last battle, but he knew the war was far from over. As he scoured the battlefield, he spotted something shiny, a small amulet with a snake engraved on it, a symbol of the Roman goddess Bellona. He picked it up, feeling the weight of the moment. They were trapped, and Hannibal was closing in fast. They found her in the temple of Bellona, the goddess of war. Her name was Claudia, and she was perfect. The priests took her to the altar and prepared to sacrifice her. Rome and Carthage were both naval powers. Some said Hannibal was so ruthless he dipped his bread in the milk of captured Roman women. But the real fear for the Romans wasn't just another war. It was the land tactics of the Carthaginians. They cut her throat, catching her blood in a bowl. If they reach Carthage, they think they can end the war. But with Gaius Sempronius to Titanus, a rookie commander, desperation is rising among the Romans. They sprinkled her blood around the camp, hoping it would protect them from Hannibal. But instead it only fed into his infamous cruelty. They sailed away from the Italian coast and reached the Carthaginian shore. But it felt way too easy. The Romans had never encountered anything like it. Before, Carthaginian ships were massive, triple-decked vessels armed with towering archers and javelin throwers. The Romans woke up to total chaos, camps wrecked, weapons gone, supplies burned. Even with doom hanging over them, they secretly hoped Hannibal might show mercy. But those hopes vanished fast when his men rolled in. What really freaked them out? A Carthaginian secret weapon, their navy. Some wild stories claimed Hannibal dipped his bread in the blood of children, tossing them to his men after ripping out their still-beating hearts. If they thought they could just stroll into Carthage and end the war, they were dead wrong. Those ships? Absolutely terrifying. Finally, the Romans hatched a plan. They sent an army across the sea, led by 2 consuls, including veteran General Lucius Marcius. But the Romans faced terrible defeats, watching in horror as Hannibal's army only got stronger. They tried everything to take him down, but nothing worked. Let's rewind to that first battle. Hannibal was a master tactician, and his troops were just too strong. Exhausted and demoralized, the Romans needed a miracle. That's when the priests had a wild idea. After 3 years of battling Hannibal, it was time for a blood sacrifice. As they marched inland, they found abandoned camps and burning villages. They were being hunted. It's time for the Second Punic War, and Hannibal is leading his army over the Alps. The Romans are feeling the heat. They need a win, and they need it now. The next day, they clash with the Carthaginians. The Romans snag a victory, but they're running low on supplies, and it's time to sack the city. Fast forward to 146 BC. This marks the beginning of the end for Carthage. Just 3 years later, Roman General Scipio Africanus would storm the city, enslaving or killing everyone inside. Carthage would never bounce back. The Romans faced not just the Carthaginians, but also a harsh, unforgiving land. Everything about Carthage screamed death. The stories of cults and strange gods filled them with fear. And that night, Hannibal's attack was brutal. His army was unstoppable, and the Romans, they were slaughtered. He gave the order to attack, and the Romans fought back fiercely, determined to the end. But what did that amulet mean? Why was it in their camp, and who had worn it? The Romans weren't the only ones gearing up for war. As the armies readied themselves, the people of Rome were getting restless. Years dragged on, and Hannibal had spies everywhere, knowing the Romans' every move. This time, they needed a bigger sacrifice. A virgin was taken to the temple of Moloch, a god demanding children be thrown into his fiery embrace. What happened next? The Romans were horrified. Hannibal's army was just too strong, and his tactics brilliant. The Romans were forced to retreat. In the end, Rome conquered Carthage, but it came at a heavy price. There are no gods anymore. The last one died screaming in flames. But before that, there was Caesar. Rome had a handful of Caesars, names tied to its glory and power. Julius Caesar, the man who became a god and then was torn apart. That's the story this month. Here's how the great man met his end. It's second-person horror. You're right behind Caesar on the Ides of March. Picture this. It's 48 BC, and Alexandria is wild. With Caesar gone, the Senate is feeling bold. Why does a Roman dictator's death still hit home today? She was the ultimate Roman matron, you know? No surprise, then, that she chose his name with care. His birth name was Gaius, a common folk name, but she renamed him after Caesar, the mythical founder of the Julian gens, a dynasty that traced its origins back to Venus and Saturn. Rome was his playground, and he wasted no time reshaping it. He reorganized courts, revamped the calendar, and kicked off civil wars, conquering Gaul and flipping the Roman world upside down. By 49, crossing the Rubicon with his army, he was unstoppable. But just hours after his death, the conspirators were ready to create a new Caesar. It was Octavian. Caesar named him his heir in his will, but that didn't mean much. On the Ides of March, the conspirators thought they were saving Rome from a tyrant. Instead, they kicked off an empire that would last for centuries. The only real power Octavian had was Caesar's fortune. Cassius spilled the beans about their plot to him. So did Augustus live up to his destiny or betray Caesar's memory? To get the full scoop on Rome, check out this course, Rome, A Cultural History. The answer might depend on whether Caesar was really a god. And hey, when you sign up, you'll unlock my entire video catalog, including exclusive content you won't find anywhere else. Octavian collected his blood-stained robes and kept them close. He was careful to burn them in a special ceremony, burying the ashes in the hearth of the Julian house. Caesar wasn't a tyrant. He was a god, and those who took him down were just mere mortals. Imagine if the assassins had really succeeded, if he had bled out right there in the Senate instead of making it back to the Temple of Vesta, where the Vestal virgins lived, and women weren't allowed to bleed. Rome might have looked completely different. His son would have stepped up, transforming Rome from a republic to an empire. When Caesar hit Alexandria, chaos was everywhere. Brutus, a philosopher and Stoic, thought Caesar's ambitions were too much. He didn't expect Caesar to die right away. Curious about more? John and I dive into these questions in our free course. And Wondrium has loads of fascinating documentaries on every topic you can think of. Caesar fell head over heels for Cleopatra, who became his mistress. The next day, when the doctors checked on him, they found him dead. Someone had definitely poisoned him, but who? Everyone pointed fingers at Cleopatra, and Brutus and Cassius tried to pin it on her. But when they embalmed Caesar for his trip back to Rome, they found the poison in the salve treating his wounds. Turns out one of his own doctors must have done it. In the chaos that followed, he made powerful enemies and some unexpected friends. Eventually, he triumphed over Mark Antony and Cleopatra at Actium in 32 BC, and by 27 he became Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. All we have left of him is this marble bust, which, believe it or not, was actually carved in the early Middle Ages. Crazy, right? Despite all the movies and plays about Caesar, the truth is we don't really know much about the guy. No portraits exist, which is just wild. And here's a twist. The soothsayer who warned him about the Ides of March? Many people listened to those warnings, but none could stop Caesar from striding into the Senate. Under his influence, he got into the traditional Roman hustle of land speculation. He snapped up run-down properties in Rome, kicked out the tenants, and divided the land among his clients and hangers-on. In just a few years, he racked up a small fortune. Then there's Cleopatra, who transformed him from a fierce warrior into a lover. She wrapped him in luxury, took him on pleasure cruises on her warship, and dressed him in fine linen, just like the Greek poets used to dress their gods. It was hard to resist her charm, and she had a couple of tricks up her sleeve, too. She gave him a son and then another, little Caesars. So in 60 BC, Caesar teamed up with two other rising stars, Pompey and Crassus, to form the first triumvirate. They held the top three offices, consul, praetor, and tribune, and ruled Rome together for a few years. But when Crassus died in 53, the friendship between Caesar and Pompey started to crumble. Pompey had the Senate backing him and the legions at his command, but Caesar? He had the people of Rome on his side. Right here we see Pompey, defeated and lying at the feet of his conqueror, Caesar. But this moment stirs up unease in Caesar, especially since his wife, Calpurnia, has had a dream predicting his doom in this very city. To calm her worries, he decides to throw a triumph, a grand parade of war captives through the streets. But when Pompey's widow shows up, the celebration turns to dust. In her, Caesar only sees the haunting reminder of his own mortality. Suddenly you hear that first knife slice through his flesh, and you instinctively turn away. He glances back, eyes wide with shock, mouth agape, as blood begins to trickle down his toga. The Senate wants him back in Rome to squash a revolt in Cisalpine Gaul. Even though he's reluctant to leave his blissful life in Egypt, Caesar agrees. He leaves Cleopatra in charge and heads back to Rome, accompanied by his adopted son, Octavian, who's destined to become the first emperor. But the wound he carries can't be healed, not by doctors nor by prayers. His friend Atticus arrives with grim news. The Roman winter is harsh and the people are turning against him. What has happened? This is a story of ambition, love, and betrayal. Caesar is searching for distraction and finds Cleopatra, the enchanting queen of Egypt, weaving her magic like a sorceress. But while she has captured his heart, Rome is getting restless. The moment he steps into Egypt, he realizes he might have made a huge mistake, and just like that, everything goes dark. So why should we care about this tale almost 2,000 years later? We know more about his mother, Aurelia, than about him. Young Caesar didn't stand out much, just a guy related to Marius, a big deal in the late Republic. But when he went to war, the people rallied behind him, and he came out on top. Pompey ran to Egypt and met his end thanks to Cleopatra's orders, but no one saw Brutus coming. In the end, Caesar's wounds were treated, but he was already slipping away. Octavian took to the Forum, reaching out to the people. His reign? A whopping 40 years that kicked off a golden age, but yeah, it came at a cost bloodshed. Imagine Pompey's ghost, all draped in white and fiery, lingering behind Caesar that fateful day. One thing's for sure, Caesar's blood turned into gold. For 4 centuries, folks flocked to his site, hoping to catch a glimpse of his divine vibe. And those Gallic wars almost spelled disaster for him. Check out the video above for the scoop. But to really get the full picture of what was happening in Rome, you gotta dive into its history. What led to Rome's collapse? Why was it so obsessed with sex? This is your chance to explore one of history's biggest cities. Best part, it's totally free. Wondrium has something for everyone, whether you want to learn or just chill. And there you have it, how Caesar met his end. But first, he conquered Gaul. You stroll through the marbled halls of Palatine Hill, surrounded by echoes of laughter, whispered secrets, and lovers' murmurs under the stars. There's a weird vibe in the air, right? It's 14 AD, and Tiberius is off having fun on Capri. You've been called to meet him today. What's going on? The road to Palatine Hill feels extra long. Courtiers whisper nervously, their faces pale. Caligula's wild energy sparkles in his eyes as he rants about the gods. But behind that excitement lies a chilling ruthlessness, ready to pounce. It's a tense scene, and you can feel the danger. But deep down there's a darker truth. His madness hides a soul lost in darkness. The music floats through your window, a haunting echo from the emperor's palace. His paranoia grows, twisting into a terrifying beast. Senators disappear, their voices lost forever, while poets and philosophers vanish, their ideas seen as threats to a crumbling order. He chains women to chariots like horses, whipping them through the streets. Servants gossip about artists and poets who've crossed the emperor, their names wiped from memory like they never existed. Citizens disappear, their homes sealed with wax, and their fates unknown. Rumors swirl like smoke across the forum, right? Spying eyes peek from behind curtains, and every shadow feels loaded with danger. You walk carefully, sensing that invisible gaze on your back. One wrong glance or misheard word could seal your fate. The city, once so vibrant, is now wrapped in a heavy fog of fear. Whispers weave a tapestry of terror, threatening to engulf Rome. It's haunting and beautiful, but there's a sadness that resonates deep inside you. You lie awake, listening as Nero pours his heart into his music, expressing the torment of his genius. Then, silence falls, leaving you wondering about the tortured soul behind that melancholy beauty. The music becomes an obsession, haunting your dreams every night. You can't help but be drawn to the emperor's melodies. They're so mournful and beautiful. But lately there's a darker vibe, a chill that creeps in. You feel a shift in the notes, like something's off. Every step you take feels heavy with danger. The music still calls to you, but now fear mixes with fascination. Is it a warning for those who cross him? The question hangs in the air as you navigate Nero's dangerous court, where even music can be deadly. You grip a basket of figs, but they slip from your hands. As you bend to pick them up, a servant girl rushes by, knocking you down before vanishing around a corner. Your heart races. Are the servants in on the emperor's schemes? Do they hunt for victims at his command? The palace, once a haven of luxury, is now a dangerous maze. Trust is gone, and you're just a pawn in this game. You lean in, half curious, half scared by his wild rants. The streets buzz with trade, laughter, and chatter. The emperor spins tales of his conquests, his words sweet yet chilling, leaving you uneasy. The crowd's cheers grow louder, and while Nero soaks up the love, a flicker of fear flashes in his eyes. That applause, It scares him just as much as it thrills him. He knows how quickly their love can turn to hate. As the night drags on, you can feel Nero's restlessness. He paces, eyes darting around like he's spotting hidden threats. His once booming voice now shakes with anxiety. You can't help but watch as his facade crumbles, revealing a tormented soul. Whispers fill the opulent halls, and fear grips him. Convinced conspiracies lurk everywhere. You weave through the twisting halls, each step echoing in the heavy silence. Eyes peek at you from behind doors, filled with fear. Servants whisper about the Emperor's latest whims, and every shadow feels like a lurking threat. You want to escape this suffocating atmosphere, but where can you go? Nowhere feels safe with the Emperor's paranoia everywhere. Yet beneath this lively scene, a dark vibe is brewing, hinting at trouble ahead. You stroll through the bustling marketplace, inhaling the spicy aromas and hearing laughter from nearby taverns. But then you catch a few senators whispering about Nero's growing tyranny. Accusations fly, and you can feel the tension in the air. Senators glance at each other, wondering who's next on the chopping block. You slip away to a peaceful temple garden, but the Emperor's pacing like a caged beast, his mind clearly unraveling. It's pretty scary. Suddenly he stops, eyes blazing with a fierce determination. He turns to you, looking dead serious. "You need to find out who defied me," he commands. Rumors swirl about wild parties and unspeakable acts happening in the palace. You watch from a distance as his madness spirals, his mind completely untethered from reality. He claims to hear voices from the gods, pushing him toward greater excesses. He builds temples to made-up deities and sacrifices prisoners to appease them. Senators are getting uneasy, sensing a storm brewing. Soon enough, Caligula makes his move. Senators who dare to criticize him. They're summoned to the palace, and then, poof, gone without a trace. You feel a hand on your shoulder and turn to see the messenger. The Emperor will see you now. Relief floods you. The wait is finally over. The Emperor sits on a golden throne at the far end, his face impassive. Did you speak too softly? Look away for too long? Breathe too deeply? Or not bow low enough? You shudder at the thought. In a place where emperors hold the fate of Rome in their hands, and their gladius decides the fate of those around them, this is serious business. As you kneel, he motions for you to rise. But Capri is a different world, too much wine, too many beautiful boys, and not enough oversight. You know what I mean? His eyes pierce you like a hawk eyeing its prey. Others talk about non-stop orgies, drinking games with slaves who lose their lives when they lose the game. It's dark stuff, right? The interview doesn't go well. Your pleas for help are dismissed, and soon you find yourself ushered out, empty-handed. The woman found, she bore signs of violence, her throat cut clean. You'd better tread carefully because this isn't some fairy tale. This is real Roman history. Now whispers say the Emperor is hunting for someone to share his dark secret. If you can keep it under wraps, you'll be handsomely rewarded. Those who oppose him in the Senate, accused of treason and banished. Now he's just a sinister figure, bending to the Emperor's will and handing out favors with a cruel twist. Welcome to the Imperial Machine, folks. It's the darkest chapter of the Roman Empire. With every new rumor, a chill sweeps across the city, and senators start to wonder if they might be next. You wake up in your room in Rome, dreams of cobbled streets and shadowy alleys still fresh in your mind. But the sunlight pulls you back to reality. The rumor mill is buzzing, and the name Sejanus keeps popping up. Tiberius, once trusted Praetorian prefect, now just a shadow of his former self. But even here, peace eludes you. The echo of the senator's whispers lingers in your ears. If so, why is he flipping out now? You struggle to keep your surprise in check, knowing that showing any confusion could cost you dearly. His insanity knows no bounds, and Rome cowers under the shadow of his unhinged rule. Nobles who are summoned to the island never seem to make it back. Senators who dare to question the emperor about money matters, they vanish too. Sunlight streams through high windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. But the emperor sits shrouded in shadow, hidden behind a heavy purple curtain. You stammer, offering your tribute and swearing your loyalty. At the foot of the emperor's palace, you join a long line of nobles and officials, all eager to win favor with the imperial court, all hoping to leave with something good from the emperor. But his response is menacing. You're dismissed, but as you turn to leave, you hear him rasp, "Come back, you fool, and bring me news of Cassius Chaerea." You kneel before him, waiting as the minutes crawl by. The emperor's moods are as unpredictable as the weather, and today the storm clouds are gathering on his brow, and you cannot shake off the premonition that Rome's golden days are numbered. But if you fail, let's just say the punishment will be swift and merciless. He's hosting these bizarre feasts, inviting only bald, short, or fat men. Seriously, what's that about? The shadow of Nero's madness looms over the city, threatening to snuff out its flame. The emperor claims the gods have abandoned Rome, leaving it to the whims of fortune. He lashes out, accusing the heavens of plotting against him. You nod sagely, hiding your fear. He demands to know why the seas have not parted for his ships, why the winds do not obey his commands, why the rain falls on Rome and not on his palaces. You offer platitudes, hoping to appease him, but the emperor grows angrier, his voice echoing across the gardens. Suddenly he stops, his eyes fixed on a fountain. Hastily, you follow his gaze and see nothing out of the ordinary. A simple bronze statue of Aphrodite emerging from the spray of water, yet Caligula recoils as if burned. You dare to ask what is amiss, but the emperor silences you with a glare. In a shaky voice he demands to know who dared to place this goddess here, who had the audacity to invoke Aphrodite in his garden. But amidst all this chaos, a thought hits you. How did he miss this statue before? Was it always there? You stay quiet, hoping he'll cool off. But nope, his pacing picks up, and his voice climbs higher. If you can uncover the culprit, he promises a reward beyond your wildest dreams. His behavior is getting weirder and more violent, even freaking out his closest advisors. Fear grips Rome as the emperor's paranoia grows, turning neighbor against neighbor and friend against friend. He even declares war on the sea, sending ships to fight the waves. When the doors swing open, you step into a huge chamber. His booming voice demands to know why you're there. The crowd feels colder today, and even the birds seem to mock you. A chill wind whispers tales of Sejanus' downfall. You rush after the messenger through the twisting halls until you hit a big audience room. What went wrong? Whispers hint at something dark. A woman was found dead in the emperor's apartments. Tiberius is off enjoying Capri, leaving Rome to his deputies. Rumors swirl about his wild parties and the strange disappearances. Some say the bold ones are put to death. Talk of gladiatorial battles fills the air, where men and beasts clash for entertainment. The once promising leader is gone, replaced by a ruler whose paranoia knows no bounds. Those sharp eyes watching you, they glint with something chilling. Tiberius smiles, but it's a cold grin. In 14 A.D., he's pulling back, ruling from the shadows as whispers grow louder. You've heard the wild stories about plagues that have hit the world, right? But what if I told you there's a place where the pestilence didn't just show up once, but stuck around for centuries, refusing to let go? Picture this: a fire tearing through the city, wiping out everything in its path. Famous plagues that have ravaged the world throughout history. She's lost her whole family to the plague and feels completely hopeless. But then, something catches her eye, a gladiator fighting in the arena. He reminds her of her brother who died during the last outbreak. His bravery moves her so much that she decides to name her future son after him. The crowd is buzzing, desperate for help, but Emperor Antoninus can't do anything to stop the plague. Gladiators are gearing up for battle, and among them is a young guy named Titus. He's a former slave, now a gladiator, and today is his first day in the arena. Talk about nerve-wracking. He's heard the horror stories and wonders if he's really ready for this. There's no turning back now. It's fight or die. The crowd roars, swords clash, and he thinks about whether the folks in those houses know what it's like to be a gladiator, waking up unsure if today's the day they'll live or die. As he tries to sleep, nightmares haunt him, chasing him through dark forests, and he wakes up screaming. He tries to remember the stories his mother used to tell him about the old gods of Rome, the ones that had been forgotten in favor of the new emperor worship. He knows he has to be strong and brave even if fear creeps in. As a gladiator, facing his fears is part of the deal. He suits up in his armor and grabs his sword, glancing in the mirror and seeing a warrior staring back. Alone, but not afraid, he feels the strength of the old gods coursing through him. Remembering stories of Jupiter, Neptune, and Mars, he whispers a prayer, hoping they're listening. He might not recall every tale, but their power is in his veins. Alone in his room, he feels isolated, unsure if he can ever go back to being just a civilian. It's a wild world out there, and all he can do is size up his opponent, looking for that opening. Titus is scared, but he's determined to survive. He dodges and weaves, trying to avoid his opponent's sword. But the other gladiator is relentless and lands a cut on Titus's arm. Blood pours out and he cries out in pain, knowing this could be his last battle. You can still feel the icy grip of fear as you walk through the ancient ruins of Rome. Will you dare enter the cursed Colosseum, or will you heed the warnings and stay far away? The choice is yours. With their leader gone, the Egyptian soldiers lose faith, and the plot against Rome crumbles. He thinks about their courage and feels a rush of strength. The other gladiator drops to his knees and then falls. Titus has won, but he's rattled by how intense the fight was. The crowd cheers, but he can't shake the feeling that he just took a life. Was it worth it? Those cheers don't feel like a reward when he's not fighting just for their entertainment. He's fighting for his life, not as a martyr, but just to survive. Cassius and Brutus could head back to Italy, but they choose to stick around in Egypt. Here, Romans can escape the plague for a bit, enjoying gladiator battles. He thinks back to when he admired those fighters as a slave, and now he's the one in the spotlight. Was this really what he wanted? It's a nice break from the grim stuff outside. The crowd goes wild as gladiators clash, totally unaware that the plague is still lurking. They're living it up in luxury, blissfully ignorant that the plague is about to hit Rome again. It's wild, right? The emperor's palace is overflowing with riches, and the guards can't resist the temptation. Julia turns and sees a crowd gathered around a chariot. In the middle of the road lies a gladiator, bleeding from a stab wound in his chest. She watches in horror as life fades from his eyes. The plague is still around, but she didn't expect it to strike so soon. She thought the Colosseum would be safe, but now she realizes that nowhere is truly safe. The plague is everywhere, and there's no way out. They raid the palace, grabbing anything they can carry, then shut the doors, leaving Christians to burn. You've probably heard the tale of Nero fiddling while Rome went up in flames, right? Whether it's true or not, it paints a picture of his cruelty. Meanwhile, two senators, Brutus and Cassius, are on a ship to Egypt after Caesar's assassination, thinking his death will fix things in Rome. They couldn't be more wrong. The people of Rome are in chaos, and the assassins are hunted down one by one. Brutus and Cassius know that they are next, so they flee to Egypt in disguise. Welcome to our chilling exploration of the cursed Colosseum, where gladiators whisper prayers to forgotten gods. She is known for her intelligence and beauty, and she welcomes the senators with open arms. She gives them shelter in her palace and promises to protect them from harm. However, she also has her own plans for Rome. She wants to take control of the empire and make herself empress. To do this, she needs the support of the Roman army, and she is willing to do whatever it takes to get it. She begins to seduce the soldiers, promising them riches and power if they will follow her. Soon half of the Roman army is on her side, and she is ready to march on Rome. In the following years, the city will be shaken by another catastrophe, the Antonine Plague. This deadly outbreak will sweep through the empire, killing millions and leaving a scar on human history. The year is 80 AD and Rome is in chaos. But the fire is not the only disaster to befall Rome. They may not be able to escape the plague, but at least they can take a break from the fear of being arrested or crucified. Unfortunately, this respite is short-lived. One day the Christians are rounded up by the Roman soldiers and taken to the Colosseum. There they are chained to chariots and forced to pull them around the track. The Romans cheer as the Christians struggle to keep up, whipping them on when they get too slow. Finally, the Christians are released from their chains and allowed to walk among the spectators. Suddenly, the crowd begins to riot and the Christians are separated from the other spectators. But their ordeal is far from over. They are beaten and tortured, then nailed to crosses and left to die. The Romans gloat in their agony, taking bets on how long it will take for each Christian to die. Those who die quickly are considered martyrs, their blood and sacrifice honoring the gods, and those who live the longest become celebrities. As the crowds gather to watch them suffer, one man stands out from the rest. He is Peter, and he refuses to renounce his faith even in the face of death. So the Romans do something even more cruel. They rip his clothes off and leave him naked on his cross. Then they set fire to the Colosseum, turning it into a giant oven. Now the Christians are not just being persecuted for their religion, they are being used as scapegoats. The Romans want someone to blame for the fire, and they have chosen the Christians. In the midst of all this turmoil, there is one place that stands as a beacon of hope for some, the Colosseum. This massive amphitheater is the largest structure ever built in Rome, and it is here, that the Roman people come to watch the gladiators fight to the death. For them, this is a chance to escape the horrors of the outside world and focus on something else for a few hours. Among these spectators are Christians who have fled the city in hopes of escaping the persecution of the Roman authorities. As the Colosseum burns and the Christians scream inside, a small group of people watches from afar. Now, as the fire rages, the Christians are trapped inside the Colosseum with nowhere to go. Meanwhile, in the distance, a ship is sailing towards the coast of Africa. In Alexandria, they meet with Cleopatra, the most powerful woman in the world. But before she can do anything, she falls ill and dies. In the year 165 AD, the Antonine Plague strikes Rome for the second time. In the end, the plague claims the lives of Antoninus and his son, Lucius, along with millions of other Romans. Amidst all the suffering and death, there is one place that offers a glimmer of hope, the Colosseum. Among the spectators is a young woman named Julia. And so it goes on, the games in the Colosseum, a distraction from the horrors of the real world. One day, Julia is walking through the city when she hears a commotion. She turns to run, but it's too late. The plague has already claimed its next victim. Meanwhile, in the Colosseum, the games are about to begin. As the crowd roars, Titus steps into the arena and faces off against his opponent. Suddenly he remembers the story of the Christians who were burned alive in the Colosseum years ago. With renewed determination, Titus attacks. He lunges forward and stabs his opponent in the chest. As he walks off the field, he sees a group of children staring at him in awe. That night, Titus lies awake in his bed, thinking about the battle. He gets up and walks to the window. He looks out at the city of Rome and sees the lights twinkling in the darkness. He sits on the edge of his bed and closes his eyes. As the sun rises, Titus gets up and starts to prepare for the day. As he leaves his house and heads to the Colosseum, he takes a deep breath and faces the day. But the truth is, the plague never left. It carved itself into the very bones of the city. Rome was built on 7 hills, or so they say. But honestly, it feels more like 7 plagues. Think about it. Malaria, earthquakes that wrecked the Forum, locust swarms, volcanic eruptions raining fire, barbarian invasions flooding the streets with blood. And yeah, an epidemic that hit the military hard. So being a Christian back then, not exactly easy, right? But why was Rome so bent on persecuting these Christians? Whatever the reason, it totally changed history and kicked off what we now call the Dark Ages, a time of both church growth and some seriously horrific stuff done in its name. Founded by Camaldolese monks in 1584, this place was all about penance, where guys could whip themselves into the next life. Built in the 13th century on a former Medici palace, it housed 26 monks dedicated to prayer and solitude. But in 1586, 6 monks were found dead in their cells, having starved themselves. Turns out they had committed to living on just 2 ounces of bread a week. A secret document detailing these extreme rules was discovered during the investigation. The goal was to kill the flesh, to torture the body into forgetting its earthly desires, to reach such a level of deprivation that their souls would ascend to heaven before their bodies hit the ground. Well, here's the twist. 1 brother died as planned, but the other 5, they were poisoned by lead. 1 monk accidentally drank from a vial meant for exorcism. So self-starvation? Gone. But the whole flesh-denying vibe stuck around. One monk took it too far and flogged himself to death, and his successor kept it up until he met the same fate. The brothers lived in the catacombs, barely ate, and only drank water. Eventually, the Pope said enough was enough. Still, the monastery was no picnic, with most of their days spent praying and gardening. Even that wasn't enough. Over the years, they added fasting and solitude as punishments, leading to some wild outcomes. Brother Alberico, he was found missing half his intestines. Legend says rats got to him. Other brothers dealt with demonic visions and bizarre illnesses, and one even got caught dancing naked at night. They thought they could catch a glimpse of God, right? Despite the risks, hundreds of guys rushed to the monastery, drawn by the promise of something divine. It was a place marked by both good and evil, where whispers of change filled the air. Some traditions were tough to shake off, especially when blood was involved. Now it stands as a church and tomb for two popes. To stop pagans from clinging to their old ways, churches started popping up on top of former temples. Take St. Peter's Basilica, for instance. It's built over the Circus of Gaius, where some say Domitian's funeral games happened. The Pantheon was originally for all the Roman gods, and even the Colosseum turned into a prayer spot. Now there's this wild story about a martyr whose blood was collected and sent to a church in France. Relics became a big deal, and some were downright strange. At one point, the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in Cologne claimed to have one of Mary Magdalene's original tongues in a jar. Crazy, right? But that's just the start. Other relics made their way into Rome in some wild ways. Like the body of St. Valentine was supposedly snuck inside a gladiator's corpse. Then there's this story about Pope Innocent. He heard a Turk had St. Andrew's bones, invited him for dinner, got him drunk, and then swiped the bones, tossing them in a vat of wine. "Drink up," he said, "for this is the blood of the dragon." The next morning, the Turk invaded and killed 10,000 Christians. Talk about a price for blood. The Jews saw Jesus as a threat, so they handed him over to the Romans. Pontius Pilate, the governor of Judea, figured Jesus wasn't guilty of anything except claiming to be the king of the Jews. So he gave him a choice: be crucified or set free. You probably know how that goes. You'd think that would be the end, right? But Rome clearly didn't get the memo. While the crucifixion broke Jesus' body, it didn't break his message. That message spread like wildfire across the Roman Empire, much to the annoyance of those in power. Emperors thought of themselves as gods, while Jesus claimed to be God. People started ditching the old cults for the more personal faith of Jesus. As they left the temples, donations dried up, and suddenly Rome's coffers were looking empty, while the number of Christians kept growing. The authorities realized they had to act fast or risk total chaos. So they cracked down hard, killing anyone who identified as a Christian, thinking that would scare others away. But instead, it just made martyrs and turned more people into believers. Before a big battle against Maxentus, Constantine had this wild dream, a vision of a cross of light shining over the sun, with a voice saying, "In this sign, conquer." So he slapped that sign on his soldiers' shields, and guess what? They totally crushed Maxentus. Not long after, he dropped the Edict of Milan, giving everyone in the empire the freedom to practice their faith. A few years later, he even called the First Council of Nicaea to settle some church debates. But none of this would have happened without a serious change of heart from Constantine. His mom was on a mission to convert him to Christianity, but when she asked him about it, he shocked her by saying, "Do you think I'm clueless about my dad being a worshiper of the true God? What proof have I not seen? Crazy, right?" Julian the Apostate, the guy who persecuted Christians, was actually a believer himself. His own son was haunted by dreams of the resurrected Christ. They were so intense that he even tried to escape them, traveling all the way to India. But no matter where he went, he couldn't shake the vision of a crucified man calling out, "Julian, remember me." When he finally converted, he did it so passionately that he earned the nickname Julian the Philosopher. Can you imagine how his mom felt seeing her son turn around like that? But all of this was just the tip of the iceberg compared to the dark stuff lurking in the shadows of Rome, waiting to change Western civilization forever. Today we stroll past these monuments, blissfully unaware of the history they hold. He wasn't kidding, and the tribulations of those who followed him to the grave would make his own look like a walk in the park. Some were thrown to lions only to be ripped apart by the beasts before the eyes of the crowds. Others were wrapped in sheets of wax, then set ablaze, watching in horror as their own body fat fueled their tormentors. Then there were those unlucky enough to be crucified. But even in death, their suffering was not over. For once the soldiers had exhausted themselves, the bodies were cut down and dragged through the streets, paraded around like some grotesque carnival ride. In fact, at one point, a certain Bishop Hyacinth was crucified upside down, which is why even today, many churches depict him in that very posture. It didn't matter if you were a man or woman, young or old, rich or poor. If you served the one true Lord, there was nothing you could do to escape your fate. If they caught you, you'd die. And if you weren't dead already, they'd make sure you were. In fact, during the persecutions of Marcus Aurelius, 300,000 Christians are said to have been killed in Rome alone. The problem was that wouldn't stop. In fact, it would get much worse, especially when the flames fell upon a certain member of the imperial family. Now, some say that Constantine was actually a secret Christian all along, while others claim that he was truly a pagan who merely recognized the power of the new faith. Speaking of the Colosseum, legend says that beneath its very floor lies the blood of Saint Agnes, a young virgin who was sentenced to death by the emperor's brother, Publius, who demanded that she renounce her faith in Christ. And blood there was plenty of, especially at the monastery of Santa Maria del Anima del Purgatorio, located beneath the very walls of the Colosseum. And if that doesn't sound appealing, then perhaps the Abbey of San Nilo will change your mind. And so it went in Christian Rome. The empire had turned to Christ, yes, but the darkness that had festered in the shadows had simply worn new robes. If you enjoyed this episode, check out my podcast, available on various platforms. Thanks for watching. You survived the fall. Now you must survive the dark. As night descends upon the city, shadows stretch long and lean across the stones. Some are long gone, like the senators who once made laws here, now just bones beneath your feet. Others linger still, whispering on the wind. The ghosts of Romans past haunt the streets you tread. Saints wept in stone, hidden away in the recesses of the basilica, hoping that their prayers would stay the hand of the Visigoth. The darkness closes in around you, pressing, suffocating, crushing, and you know that you can never escape the horror of the fall. Not truly. All you can do is run, run until your legs give way, run until you drop dead at the feet of the gods, dead among the ruins of Rome. Behind you, the sound of drums and cymbals echoes, the laughter and shouts of barbarians reveling in their newfound victory. After 3 days, the Visigoths left Rome with 81,000 pounds of gold, untold quantities of silver and precious jewels. The citizens of Rome had lost 20,000 men and women to the invaders, either killed outright or taken captive. But where can you go? Everywhere is haunted by the ghosts of emperors and martyrs, of lovers and gladiators, of senators and slaves. The fertile soil is enriched by the crumbling foundations of Rome. The stench of stale urine and waste fills the air, mingling with the perfumes of taverns and brothels. The marble is worn smooth by time, but the frescoes in the palaces speak of emperors and empresses, their eyes sharp and living still. Then deeper you go into the city, the cries of children selling cheap wares drift up from the sewers where they hide. Here the Senate was born, laws made and broken, victories celebrated, defeats denied. There are other things in these ruins, though, besides broken statues and the dust of emperors. Nearby, the water of the Aqua Virgo flows black and thick like ink, choked by debris, its gentle flow stopped in its tracks. Everywhere you look, the monuments of Rome stand stripped and broken, desecrated by time and neglect. You may find some good folk here, though, who have stayed behind out of love for the city. Yet even among these steadfast souls there is unease. The Senate building is a smoldering ruin, its pillars toppled like bowling pins. Christians hid in the catacombs and prayed that the invaders would pass them by. Some say Rome fell in 476 when Romulus Augustulus was deposed by the Germanic chieftain. The last emperor, a mere boy, but if you listen closely, you can hear another story in the crumbling arches and broken columns. The sacks of Rome, though, were different. Looting and pillaging were expected. In 395, Alaric sacked the city. You have heard tales of the sack of Rome in 455 by the Vandals, though. For 2 weeks they stole everything they could find, taking prisoners and selling them into slavery. Majorian was never seen again, but some believe he escaped to the east and lived out his days as a monk. The aqueducts were brought low by earthquakes and disrepair. The Colosseum and the Pantheon became tombs. You turn and walk back down the Via Sacra, the sacred way, and pass by the Column of Trajan, the only remaining column of the Roman Forum, still topped by a statue. A chill wind blows through the ruined city, carrying with it the scent of death and decay. Here, the palace of the Caesars is a crumbling husk, its mosaic floors cracked and faded, its frescoed walls peeling. And so you run, stumbling through the gloom, desperate to escape the horror of the sack of Rome. As you run, you find yourself retracing your steps, running through the Forum, along the Via Sacra, over the Tiber, always the same streets, always the same ruins.